Picture a dimly lit dive bar somewhere in Texas. Smoky air, neon signs flickering in the corner, and a worn-out stage with scuffed floorboards. All eyes fix on a lanky teenage kid cradling a well-worn guitar. He's too young to be in here legally, but he's here anyway, and his small, sensitive figure stands in stark contrast to the grizzled bikers and rough-living patrons downing cheap whiskey. Then, with no warning, the kid slashes out a fiery riff that seems to ignite the entire building from the inside. Nobody can quite believe what they're hearing or seeing. This teenage boy is named Stevie Ray Vaughan, and his guitar style is so raw, so explosive, so drenched in soul that it all but burns a hole through the bar's smoky haze. In a few short years, he'll become the name on every blues-loving musician's lips, dazzling the world with a supercharged approach to Texas blues that blends the grit of Albert King, the flair of Jimi Hendrix, and the reverence of old-school guitar slingers. Stevie Ray Vaughan was born on October 3, 1954, in Dallas, Texas. His father, known to everyone as Big Jim, was an imposing ex-Navy man who loomed large, physically, emotionally, and psychologically, over the household. Stevie was a sensitive boy. He was small, introspective, and creative, none of which seemed to match the stark, rigid presence of Big Jim. Because Big Jim had a short temper and believed in corporal punishment, Stevie experienced more than his share of whippings at a young age. One story that stuck with him forever involved a broken vase. Stevie and his older brother Jimmy were just being playful kids, but Big Jim's reaction was to administer 20 lashes. That rough brand of discipline instilled a sense of fear, maybe even inferiority in Stevie from the start. He already sensed he was growing up in his father's shadow, feeling overshadowed by Big Jim's strength and quick fuse. Tension rippled through the Vaughan home, and while his father was adamant that underage drinking was unacceptable, ironically, Stevie got his very first taste of alcohol at the incredibly young age of 6. It started off as a game, mixing cocktails for himself and some neighborhood kids, thinking it was a cool trick to show off. But that early exposure to booze left a powerful impression on Stevie, foreshadowing an addictive personality that would both fuel his music and imperil his life in the years to come. Music, however, soon became his primary source of wonder. The older brother, Jimmy Vaughan, was already tinkering around with guitar. Stevie watched, mesmerized, drawn to the magic of strings and chords in a way that was more than just sibling imitation. When Stevie was around 7, someone handed him his own guitar, a low-end, possibly battered instrument that seemed almost bigger than the boy himself. But Stevie immersed himself in that guitar, practicing relentlessly, strumming until his fingertips were raw. It wasn't your average childhood pastime. Something about the instrument resonated with him at a cellular level, hinting at the phenomenon he would grow into. By the time Stevie turned 14, he was out searching for opportunities to show what he could do. He auditioned for a band called Southern Distributor, whose members decided the best way to test him was to demand he play Jeff Beck's Jeff's Boogie. It's a fiendishly difficult tune, intricate runs, rapid-fire notes, the sort of piece that a seasoned guitarist might need months to master. Stevie, never one to shrink from a challenge, nailed it note for note. The others in the room reportedly sat there in shock. This was just a kid from Dallas, yet he had the chops of someone who'd been sweating over a guitar for decades. If there had been any doubt about his raw talent, that doubt disappeared the moment he finished the last lick. Not long after, barely in his mid-teens, Stevie wound up playing at a notorious Dallas club called The Cellar. This was the kind of place that parents would bar their kids from if they could. A rough-around-the-edges establishment open all hours, crawling with bikers, hippies, shady dealers, and folks who wanted a stiff drink and the kind of music that made them forget their troubles. Stevie was too young to be out that late, but that detail didn't seem to matter to the club owners, who were more impressed by his guitar heroics than any legal technicalities. The pay was next to nothing. Sometimes he might get a few dollars per gig, or just a drink or two. But he was electrifying audiences. If a rowdy customer had an issue with the band, maybe they disliked a solo or a certain tune, they would express it by firing off gunshots rather than booing. Stevie joked later that you simply learned to duck and keep playing. Though the environment was high-octane chaos, he thrived on that adrenaline. He was learning what it meant to stand on a stage where anything could happen at any moment, forging a resilience that would become part of his myth. As word got around about this teenage phenom, local publications started showering him with recognition. Respected blues musicians and even big-name rockers who passed through Dallas would hear whispers of this skinny kid with the insane licks. Occasionally, they'd show up at the Cellar or another local club, and Stevie might be called on stage to jam. There was something distinctly compelling about how he merged the energy of rock with the deep heartache of the blues. He didn't just play notes, he channeled raw emotion through every bend, every run, every sustain. Inevitably, that rising reputation came with more partying. The Cellar was basically a breeding ground for after-hour shenanigans, boozing, smoking, any number of substances changing hands in the dark corners. Stevie's addictive streak, hinted at in childhood, began to intensify. By 1977, he was using heavily, not just on weekends, but as a daily routine. He began a relationship with a dark-haired pageant beauty named Lenora Lenny Bailey, who also happened to be the girlfriend of one of Stevie's friends, Diamond Joe Siddons. Vaughan, in a move that definitely caused friction, pursued Lenny anyway, eventually stealing her from his friend. This sowed some serious bad blood. But in the short term, Stevie and Lenny formed a passionate bond, and she was soon at his side, though many would later argue she added to his turmoil, especially as he grew wealthier and more famous. In 1978, Stevie assembled the band that would define his legacy, Double Trouble. He recruited drummer Chris Layton and bassist Tommy Shannon. Together, the trio had a chemistry that defied simple explanation. They could lock in on a groove that was so tight, so incendiary, it felt telepathic. They'd ride the waves of Stevie's solos, anchor them with a pumping rhythm section, and then unleash the sort of synergy that left audiences speechless. This new group quickly dominated Texas, playing every bar, club, or festival that would have them, and forging a reputation as the band you had to see if you cared about real blues rock. The rest of the world got its first major glimpse of Stevie Ray Vaughan in July 1982, when Double Trouble landed a slot at the Montreux Jazz Festival's Blues Night. This was a huge break. Montreux was a revered stage that drew an international crowd. By all accounts, Stevie's set was raw, blistering, and quite different from the typical Montreux fare. Some of the jazz purists in the audience didn't take kindly to his fiery approach. There were audible boos amid the applause. But even if the crowd was divided, some very influential people were blown away, including none other than David Bowie. Bowie had a razor-sharp sense for fresh talent, and Stevie's performance at Montreux apparently lit up Bowie's imagination. He soon contacted Stevie, inviting him to contribute lead guitar for Bowie's upcoming 1983 album, Let's Dance. By the time Let's Dance hit, Bowie was at a commercial peak, and Stevie's signature style gave the album a unique bite. On 6 of the album's 8 tracks, including the now iconic single Let's Dance, Stevie's guitar soared. The collaboration looked like a golden ticket for Stevie to step into the mainstream spotlight. Bowie wanted him to join the subsequent Serious Moonlight World Tour, which was sure to be massive, but tensions emerged almost immediately. Bowie's management team insisted on certain conditions. Stevie wouldn't be allowed to promote Double Trouble in press interviews, and he'd have to basically shelve his own identity to function as Bowie's guitarist. On top of that, Stevie's wife, Lenny, was barred from attending rehearsals, angering him greatly. Finally, on the day before the tour kicked off, Stevie quit. He walked away from what many believed was the opportunity of a lifetime. But Stevie's take was different. He valued artistic freedom more than the chance to stand behind Bowie each night. That risk paid off. Soon after, Jackson Browne opened the doors of his LA studio to Stevie and Double Trouble, free of charge. They went in, hammered out tracks at lightning speed, and emerged with their debut album Texas Flood in 1983. It was recorded in just 2 days, a testament to both their raw talent and the fact they'd been honing these songs in clubs for years. The record exploded onto the scene, reviving mainstream interest in blues at a time when synthesizers and pop hooks were dominating the radio. Critics took note, fans devoured it, and the phenomenon of Stevie Ray Vaughan as a guitar deity was born. Everywhere you looked, people were talking about this kid from Texas who could bend notes like nobody else and pour an ocean of feeling into each performance. But fame didn't solve Stevie's personal troubles. His relationship with Lenny was rocky. Rumors circulated that she was siphoning off his earnings or manipulating him, that finances were a persistent point of contention. Meanwhile, Stevie's own lifestyle was spiraling. Gossip suggested he'd had a fling with a Playboy bunny, contracted an STD, and passed it to Lenny, fueling jealousy and resentment. In short, the behind-the-scenes drama was as intense as Stevie's guitar solos, if not more so. By 1986, the partying and constant high-stress touring took a nightmarish toll on Stevie's body. After a gig in Germany, he was struck with a terrible physical collapse. His skin turned gray, he vomited blood, and he stood on the brink of death. Musicians around him, older bluesmen who'd seen too many wasted talents, had warned him repeatedly, if you don't get off this self-destructive ride, you won't see 40. Now that warning had become real. He woke up to the fact that his health was hanging by a thread. It was time to change or die. Simultaneously, his marriage to Lenny collapsed, and they ended up divorcing. Breaking free from that tumultuous relationship, Stevie took the steps to get sober. He faced the cold facts of addiction, checked into rehab, and made a vow. He was done living on the edge. It wasn't easy. Kicking a substance habit rarely is, but the alternative was stark. He needed to harness the same fire that fueled his guitar prowess and direct it toward saving his life. The transformation was dramatic. Newly sober, Stevie's creativity soared to new heights. He channeled everything into Double Trouble's 1989 album, In Step, a tour de force that snagged him a Grammy and reaffirmed his position as a titan of modern blues. Critics marveled at how fresh and potent he sounded, free from the haze that once weighed him down. Fans embraced this revitalized Stevie. He played with the same fiery passion, but with a clarity and precision that took his music to a higher plane. On August 26, 1990, just a year after the massive success of In Step, Stevie confided in bandmates that he'd had a disturbing nightmare, one in which he was at his own funeral. The dread lingered with him, stirring some dark feeling of premonition he couldn't quite shake. Nobody could have predicted what was about to happen, but that dream would prove hauntingly prophetic. The next night, he took part in a show near Milwaukee, sharing the stage with Eric Clapton, Buddy Guy, Robert Cray, and Stevie's brother Jimmy. The supergroup jammed for an encore, creating one of those epic, once-in-a-lifetime musical moments that those lucky enough to witness never forget. Stevie was on fire, blending with these legends seamlessly. It was the sort of performance fans talk about for years. Nobody suspected it'd be his final bow. After the show, with traffic jammed and people clamoring to get out, 4 helicopters were arranged to transport the musicians and crew. Stevie boarded the 3rd helicopter. A fog had begun to settle over the area, and conditions weren't ideal, but the pilot took off anyway. Just seconds after liftoff, the helicopter crashed into a nearby ski slope. The impact killed everyone on board instantly, including Stevie Ray Vaughan. He was only 35 years old. When the news broke, the music world reeled. This was a man in the prime of his career, having just conquered his demons, poised for even greater things. Eric Clapton, Buddy Guy, Bonnie Raitt, Stevie Wonder, and thousands of fans attended his funeral in Dallas, offering tribute to a soul who had filled the world with unfiltered emotion through his guitar. Family members later launched lawsuits alleging pilot error, suggesting that the pilot wasn't adequately certified for flight in the heavy fog. After 5 years of legal wrangling, the matter was settled, but the heartbreak remained. Stevie was buried in Dallas, the city that had given him his first glimpses of the blues life, and that also had front row seats to his painful struggles. His funeral echoed the nightmare he'd described only a day before the crash. Crowds, tears, the sense of a monumental ending. In the aftermath, Jimmy Vaughan shouldered the heavy responsibility of maintaining Stevie's legacy. He kept performing, oversaw the posthumous releases of some of Stevie's unreleased recordings, and handled the legal aftermath with the helicopter company. Tributes poured in from every corner. Younger guitarists, especially, looked to Stevie Ray Vaughan as the paragon of raw blues rock. John Mayer, who emerged a decade after Stevie's passing, would later call him an unstoppable celestial force, who proved that guitar-based blues still had relevance. A statue of Stevie stands by Lady Bird Lake in Austin, an enduring tribute to the place he arguably loved best, the city that recognized him as one of their own. Over time, other tributes manifested: annual Stevie Ray Vaughan tribute concerts, special reissues of his albums featuring unreleased tracks, and covers from rising guitar virtuosos who still marvel at the wizardry he packed into every H riff. His influence runs so deep that entire generations of guitarists mimic his style: heavy strings, massive bends, a soulful vibrato, that unyielding right-hand attack. Guitar magazines regularly list him among the greatest of all time, right next to Jimi Hendrix and Eric Clapton, the very icons who once inspired him. When Stevie got inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2015, John Mayer gave the induction speech, praising his cosmic melding of Hendrix's spirit, Albert King's fiery technique, and Jimmy's unwavering precision. In truth, Stevie was more than the sum of his influences. He was a phenomenon unlike anything the 1980s had experienced, especially at a time when electronic pop was overshadowing the grit of guitar-led music. The synergy he shared with Double Trouble is still cited as one of the tightest combos in rock. Drummer Chris Layton and bassist Tommy Shannon had an almost telepathic lock with Stevie's lead runs. They followed every curve, soared on every crescendo, and anchored every quiet moment with unwavering support. Fans argue that this interplay produced some of the most compelling live shows the blues world has ever known. Shows where Stevie might break a string mid-solo, yet not lose an ounce of momentum, or spontaneously shift into a Hendrix cover, tapping into that same cosmic energy that fueled his heroes. Though Stevie died too soon, he left behind a trove of recordings, from high-energy live tapes to demos that capture his evolving artistry. Aviation experts have studied the fatal crash in detail, concluding that pilot disorientation in thick fog caused the helicopter to slam into the slope. The tragedy spurred deeper scrutiny of pilot qualifications and safety protocols for traveling musicians, an unfortunate but necessary conversation resulting from the grief. His posthumous fan base has only grown. Young people discover Pride and Joy or Texas Flood on streaming platforms, maybe because an older relative told them, "You need to hear Stevie Ray Vaughan if you want to understand real guitar playing," or because they stumbled upon a guitar forum where veterans declared Stevie an essential listen. That first taste usually hooks them. The scorching slide down the strings, the tang of Texas twang merging with deep blues phrasing, the emotional vibrato that sounds like heartbreak, triumph, and ecstasy all in one note. It's easy to see why many rank him among the greatest who ever lived. So the next time you listen to Voodoo Child's Slight Return and hear his scorching spin on the Hendrix classic, or lose yourself in the sweet anguish of Life Without You, remember the boy who began by cowering under Big Jim's brutal discipline, the teen who dodged bullets at the cellar, the man who broke hearts and nearly destroyed himself with substance abuse, the guitarist who soared to massive fame, found redemption, then tragically boarded that helicopter into the fog. It's all there in the notes, a life story told through 6 strings and an unstoppable torrent of feeling. We lost Stevie Ray Vaughan far too early, but in that short time, he proved that real passion doesn't just burn, it sets the whole world on fire and leaves an afterglow that never truly peed.